Recording. All right, I'm gonna admit our guests.
Cool.
Do you know anybody that's coming?
I don't think so.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi there, Rob.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Adita. And Teresa Andrews. Hi there.
Hello.
How did you hear about us, Adita? We've got audio there. Hi, Philip. All right. Hi there. All right. Well, I think we've got, we had some people pop in and pop out, so we will just let them come in as we get going. To everyone tuning in, hello, my name is Jessica Mitch Holmes, and I am co-founder and CEO at Momentum. You are joining our meetup series called A Day in the Life, which is a series that we host about once a month, where we bring in software engineers that are actively in the doing jobs out there in the world, and we have them share a day in the life of the type of job that they're doing and talk about their experience learning how to get into the industry. So the format of today is I'm going to introduce today's guest. We are going to get started with some questions to give you some background about our speaker, Sara, and then we will open it up for audience Q&A. So we really want this to be led by all of you that are tuning in. We want to make sure we're answering any questions you have about getting into the industry. So make sure you're going ahead and getting your questions ready. There are two ways to ask questions. The first is you can drop them in the meeting chat box, and I will make sure that we are facilitating the questions from there. Or you can, of course, do the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and then we will call on you. You can unmute and ask your question. We've got an intimate group so far today, so don't be shy. We'd love to hear your voice and have a dialogue going. So that's the format of today. Again, you're at the Momentum Learn meetup group, and I'm going to introduce one of our Momentum trained software engineers, Sara Hartsoe. Sara graduated from Momentum's program in 2021. Started the course during the height of the pandemic days and has since been is a professional software engineer, has been working now since she graduated in 2021 and proudly got to drop the associate software engineer title last September. So Sara has moved up already in her career working for a company called Insight. So with all of that said, Sara, I'm going to spotlight you for the group. And I'm going to get us kicked off with some questions. So let's see. You should be spotlighted now, or at least I think that you should be spotlighted now. And Sara, let's go ahead and get started. If you could say hello and tell us a little bit about what you did before you got into software engineering. Uh-oh.
Hello.
Hi there, Ray. How are you?
Well, as good as can be expected. I just had a birthday that put me over. I just turned 80 in March, so I guess I'm doing pretty well.
Happy birthday, Ray. How did you hear about us?
My wife tracked you down, and basically, this is the first one of these I've done.
Okay.
Here, wait a minute.
All right. Well, we're glad to have you here, Ray.
Okay. My background, I took a class in Introduction to Computers in the fall semester of 1965. and began working as a programmer or as an operator and programmer trainee in 1966 in January. And, it's been downhill from there.
Sounds good. Well, glad to have you here, Ray. We are waiting for our speaker to rejoin. Here we go. So Ray, we're going to put you on mute so we can turn it over to the speaker.
Terrific.
All right, Sara, do we have you back?
I'm so sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. We were just getting some insight into one of our guests who's joining, who just had a birthday. So happy birthday to Ray. And Sara, we'll let you go ahead and get us started with a little bit about yourself and your prior to joining the tech industry, what you did.
Yeah, thank you so much. So prior to jumping into tech and momentum, I was actually working in retail for over 10 years. I kind of bounced around in a variety of retail settings, worked for an Apple store for a few years. I managed a few different bookstores and kind of museum gift shops. And then when the pandemic hit and a bunch of stuff shut down, kind of transitioned into like e-commerce, customer service. So doing everything remote and doing everything online without getting to be face-to-face with customers, and really loved what I did. But I think I kind of started to hit roadblocks with just feeling like I had kind of come, like I said, 10 plus years is a long time to do kind of the same thing every day. So I was really looking to stretch myself, grow, and really kind of take on something new. And that was what prompted me wanting to jump into tech.
Fantastic. So you decided that you wanted to get into the tech space. How did you decide that you wanted to do software engineering specifically? What did you do to explore this career fit for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. This was probably about a year of me thinking, I want to do something different. I want to get into tech. What can I do that is not going to make me go back to school for 4 years? And really, like I said, spent a full year really thinking about my options and kind of doing some research and investigating. And really what pointed me to software engineering was a close friend of mine is a graduate of Momentum. He graduated 2 years before I attended Momentum, and he was really kind of the driving force of, he kind of gave me that a day in the life almost of what it's like to kind of be a software engineer every day, what the work looked like for him. And that was really kind of my insight into, okay, I can do this. This feels like a good fit. I like what he's doing. I can do that. So I really just kind of followed in his footsteps.
That's fantastic. And that's one of the reasons that we do this event too, is, so many people I feel like don't have the opportunity to understand what happens and what this career field looks like. And just understanding a little bit more about it is what helps people decide if it's a good fit for them, if it's something that they want to pursue. So you joined Momentum's program and you joined in the height of the pandemic. Was that daunting? Can you talk about some of the emotions that you had making this leap?
Yeah, I think it did feel a little bit daunting at the beginning. I think part of the reason why I wanted to go with Momentum is I was like, I really kind of need the structure of a class schedule, learning, hands-on help. And so I really thought that the pandemic would take away from that. And so I was a little nervous about that. I was also a little nervous about there's something about like going to a class with other people where you have this almost immediate bond of, okay, we're all in this class together. This is our first day. We're all brand new, but it feels a little different when your first day is like this and you're looking at a bunch of people on a computer screen. And I really thought that would kind of dampen the connection between me and my classmates or the instructors. It might have been different, but I think in the end, it was really, I think the thing about doing this boot camp or any boot camp in general is you really get you get to take away what you put into it. And so I really was like, I don't want doing this all remotely to change my experience at all. So I'm going to put all I can into it, whether that means, showing up to class every day, asking as many questions as I can. If I can't strike up a conversation with the person sitting next to me, I'm going to do it online through Slack. And I really just tried to put in the same effort that I would have put in if I was in person. And so I think in the end, I don't think it, it was a different experience, but it definitely wasn't any less of an experience.
Fantastic. And then let's just talk about like the nature of learning how to code, and how does that compare to any other learning that you've done? What were strategies that you used? We've got some folks tuning in that are in the midst of this experience. So thoughts about the actual learning process and getting ready for the job.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think learning how to code, when I was first starting, I had no prior coding experience. I really had no knowledge of what's HTML, what's CSS, what's JavaScript. I really went in, I get that question a lot of like, well, I don't know anything about coding. Like, what did you know about coding before you did it? And I'm like, nothing. And so I think I kind of was a little bit intimidated by, okay, is this learning process going to be any different from previous learning process? And I don't think so. I think it, again, going back to that, you get to take away what you put in. And so it was really important to me that to learn to the best of my ability, that I could show up every day. And I think asking the right questions is so important in learning how to code. We're pretty much all new to it. So I think not being afraid to ask those questions, there really truly is no such thing as a dumb question. And I think really kind of just adopting that mindset and shifting into that is going to be huge in being successful in learning. And I think kind of something that helped a lot too is one of our instructors spoke to very, very early on, the idea of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And that was huge for me in learning. And I think if you can kind of accept that it's going to be a little confusing, you're not going to know everything jumping in, and you can just kind of be comfortable with what you don't know, but know that it will come in time and your effort will pay off, I think is also kind of key in kind of shifting into learning how to code.
For sure. So when you completed the program and then you start your job search, what was that like? And you ended up at Insight. Can you share a little bit about how you approached the job search and why you ultimately chose the offer to work for Insight?
Yeah, so approaching the job search, I approached that head on. Once I graduated, I took a few days of like, okay, I graduated, I need a break, I need to sleep for a couple days. Then I really quickly shifted into applying for jobs became my full-time job. And so I really threw myself into job hunting. I will say something that I feel like helped a lot in my job search is networking through LinkedIn. LinkedIn was my best friend in how I made my connections. I actually documented my momentum process on LinkedIn and kind of gave these weekly updates of what I was working on that week, what we were learning, and kind of wrote these little almost like blog updates. And that really kind of gave me a foot up almost in my networking and my job search of, I had these kind of like tangible progress notes almost of, look, here's what I learned, here was my experience, here's my progress. And that I had multiple recruiters say that stood out to them. So I think that helps a lot. And not saying that you have to do that, because I know LinkedIn can also be a little intimidating. It just definitely helped me. And then, like I said, kind of shifting into it as if job hunting was my full-time job. I really utilized a lot of Momentum's job hunting tools. We made progress boards, like task boards, to kind of help organize and keep track of, okay, I applied for this job today. Let's move it into interview column. If I get an interview, if I don't hear back, let's move it into this done column. And that really helped me stay organized, like throughout the job hunting. I also had very specific things that I was looking for. It was very important to me to be remote. It was very important to me to find jobs that were kind of tailored towards the junior, like associate level. So I think kind of knowing what is important to you will kind of help narrow down your job search too, and kind of help you, because there's a lot out there, but there's a lot, so I think kind of having a vision for what you want and what's important to you, I think will help you kind of sift through jobs when it comes to that.
For sure. Yeah. We always say that, like, there's times in life where having a wide aperture is helpful. And then there's times in life where you have to narrow it down. And the job hunt can be so daunting if you don't narrow it down and understand what's important to you, what your priority is, what type of industry you want to work with, what type of job title you want to have, because there's a lot of things you can do with code, and narrowing that down makes a big difference. So ultimately, you accepted a job with Insight. What was your interview like for that company, and what made you excited about that company?
Yeah, that's a good question. Insight really stood out to me. I was talking to a handful of companies right before I accepted my offer with Insight. And probably the number one thing that set Insight apart was their support and their programs to kind of further your learning and your knowledge as a software developer. I think what's important to know going into software development is that you're really truly never done learning. The industry is changing quite literally every day. And so you're never going to know all that there is to know. So having that in mind, when I was interviewing with companies, I made sure to ask every single, not just the company, but every single person from those companies who I talked to. I asked them all, how do you and your company support the continued education and the continued learning for software development? Because it just never ends. And Insight really stood out the most with Insight will really value our continued learning, and not only our learning, but our learning and what our interests are. So I can approach my company and I can say, like, I'm really interested in learning Databricks, and I can learn Databricks on company time. I chose Databricks because I actually literally just did that. And I even recently went to them and I said, like, I worked with Python a lot when I was at Momentum. I haven't really worked with it since, but I've been interested in going back to Python. So I went to my manager and said, hey, I'd like to learn a little bit more Python. And now I'm taking another Python class. So that was really like what stood out to me with them is I can keep learning. I have an environment that's supportive and encouraging. With that, I think it's so nice to be a new developer and know that my teammates and my managers and my team support me in just continuing to learn. So I think that was like really the number one thing with Insight that I was like, yes, I would like to choose Insight.
That's fantastic. And for some context for everybody that's tuning in, what does Insight do? Can you tell us a little bit about the company?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are tech consultants. So Insight actually started in the 80s doing computer hardware sales. So like going door to door and like trying to sell other companies like computers and keyboards and things like that. And so it's really grown and evolved with, like I said, tech changes every day. And so Insight has really adapted. So we are a consulting service. So I work for Insight, but I will actually be contracted out to other companies who approach Insight and say, hey, we have this app that we'd like to build, or we have this database and we'd like to migrate it to on cloud solution or things like that. So it really can be such a varied or such a wide variety of things that Insight does. So I get to do a little bit of a lot of different things, which is fun. But yeah, it's all tech consulting.
Awesome. Thank you for that context. I'm sure that's helpful. So last question, and I'm going to say last question really loud for everybody that's tuning in, so you know that your opportunity to ask questions is coming up right around the corner. But of course, this event is called A Day in the Life. So you explained a little bit about, what the company does and that you're contracted out to help support clients on their technical needs. What does that mean on a practical basis? What does that mean on an average Wednesday? What does your job look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say with consulting, my day-to-day is really dependent on the project that I'm on. So for example, for the last 5 months, I was actually working on an internal project, and then I had a few weeks where I transitioned off of that. We call that being on the bench. So it's a little bit of downtime. And then 2 weeks ago, I started back up with another project with a different client. So it can shift, from project to project, what my day-to-day routine looks like. But right now we work and some of you might be familiar with Scrum or Agile style projects. If you're not familiar, it's just kind of a cadence of how to run a project. It's a just kind of method of how to approach breaking up the work into smaller chunks or sprints, as we call them. So that can greatly affect the day-to-day life, because usually if you're working in an agile project, you'll have a daily stand-up. So that's how I start my morning, is every day from 9:45 to 10 a.m. We're doing our daily stand-up. So that's a quick, it's meant to be super fast. Everybody's who's on the project jumps on the call. We give a very quick update of what we're working on that day, and we kind of update if we're blocked on anything or if we need help with anything. And then it's just supposed to be this real quick round robin. So that's how I start my day. And then once I'm done with that, I'll kind of take a look at my tasks that are currently assigned to me. If I'm in the middle of anything, I'll mark it as in progress. And so I'll just kind of take a look at my tasks. And then once I have like a good visual, check-in of where I'm at for the day, then I'll just really jump into my work. And, I like to work in chunks by working for 50 minutes. And then I try to take a 10-minute break, working for 50 minutes, try to take a 10-minute break, and I'll go on throughout the day like that. And so most of it is independent. I usually work on my own. Right now I'm working with a tool called Power BI, which is data visualizations. So that's what my screen looks like for the majority of the day. And then sometimes there might be meetings sprinkled in. When you're working in agile projects, you can do sprint reviews or retros, or just kind of these types of meetings that are just kind of like overall bigger check-ins. So that's usually my day-to-day. And like I said, it changes with every project, but right now that's usually how it looks.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we've got some questions for you coming in through the meeting chat. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to questions. Again, everyone, I've got a question from Alan first, but for all of you tuning in, you can ask questions in 2 ways. You can put up your hand with the feature on Zoom, and I'll answer, or we'll go in the order of questions coming in, and then you can also type your questions into the meeting chat box. So the first question for you, Sarah, are what are common practices you would suggest for someone who is learning new coding languages? And are there any tips or tricks that you could think of that really helped you during the learning process?
I think common practices, it's something that I really love about learning how to code and software development in general is, I don't know if there's like one, there's not necessarily like a best practice of how to learn. There's so many ways of how to learn, whether that's actually attending a boot camp. I know people who are completely self-taught who just learn from completely watching YouTube videos. There's so many free resources out there. I think tips and tricks really kind of, for me, some things that worked were kind of breaking things down into very small chunks. And sometimes when I would get overwhelmed with like my code or what I was doing, or felt like I didn't understand it, it was usually a time to like take a step back and really look at it in like very small pieces. And if I could try to figure out very small pieces, then it can build from there. A very common tip and trick that I think a lot of software developers use is something we learned at Momentum. Actually, it's called rubber ducking. So most people will have like a rubber duck on their desk. Some people use like something completely else, or like any type of like tangible like character figurine or anything. And it's this idea that when you come across a problem, you verbalize your problem to your rubber duck and explain the problem to your rubber duck. Explain, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to do. This is what I've currently tried. And really like verbalizing where you're stuck really kind of helps like the wheels in your brain find the solution. And it's very common that as you're verbalizing your problem to your rubber duck, you like figure out the solution completely on your own. That's very, very common in the industry. Like I said, I learned that technique at Momentum, but so many of my coworkers who did not come from Momentum, I'll do the same thing, or we'll do it with each other where it's very frequent that I'll get a phone call or I'll message a teammate and say like, hey, I have this problem. Can I talk it out with you real quick? And same exact thing, as I'm vocalizing my problem to my teammate, I'm like, oh, you know what? Never mind, figured it out before they even get a chance to give their feedback. So I think that's kind of a key tips and tricks, is just kind of learning like how to break down your problem into these small steps. And again, like learning how to ask the right questions. And I usually outline that by, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I have tried already. And here's specifically what's not working. So those are usually my three kind of questions that I ask myself with any problem, like while I'm trying to learn. And again, just really trying to break it down into very small bite-sized pieces.
Thank you for that response. Hopefully that was helpful to you, Alan, and let us know if you have any other follow-ups. So we're going to continue opening this up for other questions from those of you that are tuning in. The next question is, are there any specific skills or qualities that you believe are essential for success in the field?
You know, I think the biggest one that you'll hear and that I agree with is just kind of a desire to keep learning. Because again, kind of as I spoke to, like software development, you're just truly never going to know all that there is to know. If you meet a software developer who says that they know everything about software development, they do not. So I think that really is kind of the main skill or quality that you'd like to have is, do I have a desire to keep learning? Do I, problem solving is another big one. Sometimes I think people who like putting their brain power to use and kind of trying to hunker down and like figure out problems and solve a puzzle. Those can be key. But I think that's, that's kind of it. Software developers that I meet come in like all different backgrounds, like I'm not, I went through Momentum, so I don't have like a computer science degree or anything, though you will meet a lot of software developers who do have degrees, who don't have degrees. So I don't think that there's like one set of specific skills or qualities other than kind of the desire to keep learning. So I think that's key.
Right. Another question about in reference to the concept of rubber ducking. What are the more common programs that you use in the day-to-day? So tools that you use. And the follow-on is, I know you mentioned that you were interested in getting back to Python. So I'm curious to what programs, what languages you're currently using.
Yeah, so my current tool that I'm using every single day is called Power BI. Power BI is a Microsoft based tool. It does data visualization. So it's going to be, usually I'm connecting to a database, and that database can be any type of database. I'm importing data, and then I'm building reports that are usually just ways to visualize the data that already exists. So it's a lot of like charts and graphs and KPI cards and things like that. So it's just kind of taking the numbers and data that lives inside the database and visualizing it. So giving it a nicer look than a bunch of rows and columns of numbers and data points. So right now that's my primary tool. Within Power BI, you can use two languages. One is called DAX, which is a very like mathematical data kind of number crunching language. And then another one is called SQL, SQL. SQL is very common when you're working with data. It's kind of a way to query the data and send requests for, hey, I'd like to see this type of information come back from the database, and I'd like to take a look at it. And SQL is a great tool for that. Python, yeah, like I said, I have not been working in my day-to-day life with Python, but it's something I'd like to get back to. So that was why I kind of wanted to take another class, get a bit more in depth with it. It's a little like, with us being tech consultants, sometimes my day-to-day tools are dependent on what the client is asking for. So unfortunately for me right now, my client is not asking me to work with Python, so that I don't have that opportunity, but I'm kind of hoping that in the future I'll have more opportunities to work with Python. So the tools that I'm using are very dependent again on my client. So like I said, right now it's Power BI, SQL, and this language called DAX. But it can change. My first project at Insight, I was working solely in JavaScript, and that was the only language that I was working with all day, every day. And I did that for about 4 months. So it really is kind of dependent for me on the client, but I hope that helps, and let me know if it doesn't.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, to feed off of that. So every time that you have a new client, new project, you're going to have to pick up something new. So what is your first approach when you take on an assignment and you're okay, I'm going to use this tool or this language called DAX. I've never used it before. How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's a good question and timely question, because I'm actually I'll be doing 2 projects at once, starting here in a couple weeks. And the new project that's coming in is actually doing like data validation and testing. And I've never done testing before. So that's very timely. But I think anytime I have an opportunity to get on a project and learn a new skill, my kind of first like starting point is usually I'll look within my company's like internal learning platforms and see, like, do we already have existing tools to help teach what I need to know, whether it's Power BI or data testing or whatever. And then I'll usually sit with my manager and say, like, okay, this is like the tool that I need to learn. Do we at Insight have something that exists already, or do I need to look externally? Sometimes there's both. Right now with the data testing, I had a coworker who has built a data testing tool, and he was very kind and offered to sit with me for an hour and kind of look through the code and kind of help break it down for me and give me kind of a starting point of an idea of what I need to jump in and learn. And then from there, it's really like, I'm gonna turn to Google. Google is a software developer's very good friend, and I'm probably Googling things multiple times a day. So we also at Insight, we are given subscriptions to a tool called Pluralsight, which is very similar to like a Udemy or a Coursera, where you can kind of go and type in a subject and view videos and courses on that given subject. So that's kind of my preferred method, is I'll go to Pluralsight, check out what I need to know. YouTube is also a very common, like, I'm going to look at YouTube for, data testing, but for beginners or things. I usually will tack on like for the beginners so that I can kind of start to see like the very basics of whatever I need to learn. When I learned Power BI, I specifically went through a Microsoft program to get certified. So those were Microsoft-based classes, but my company supported me in taking the certification and doing that. So it's a little bit dependent, but again, there are just so many resources for whatever you're trying to learn online, and free resources. You don't always have to throw money at things. So don't feel like, you need to spend money every time you're learning something new. There's so many things out there.
That's a good point. And I also love, and this is something that we like to stress towards people that are thinking about coming into the industry, is that you get paid to learn. Like you mentioned, your company is very aware that you're going to be taking on new projects and have to learn new skills to meet your clients' needs. And they support you in that. And part of the, salary that they're paying you comes with this agreement that you're going to be learning. And so you're getting paid to learn.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it's I think it's one of the coolest parts about this this career field in this industry. So with that said, we've got a question from Philip. And Philip, if you're paying attention, or if you've seen my follow-up question, you have a chance to respond to it. Oh, good, thank you. So Philip's looking for his first role as a software engineer, software developer, and is asking about techniques and strategies to help get more interviews. So I can take the first attempt at answering your question, Philip, and then I'm sure Sarah will want to fill in based off of her experience. But I think this day and age, one of the best tips at getting more interviews, to your question, is it's a very noisy environment right now. There's a lot of tools that are out there to help maximize and increase the amount of applications that candidates are putting into companies. Companies are getting a great influx of new applicants and new candidates, which that ebbs and flows throughout time and space depending on the overall job market. But right now, there's a lot of great candidates that are out in the market looking for opportunities. They're using tools like ChatGPT to help write resumes and cover letters. There's a lot of noise. And so the number one thing that you can do as an applicant is cut through the noise and be substantive and find a human on the other side of the screen. And this is a recommendation that we make with our job seekers at Momentum, is that finding a human will actually help you get in the door. And so we like to say, use about 80% of your time networking, having conversations, finding that human contact, and only 20% of your time actually putting in applications, because more often than not, those applications might be going into a deep, dark hole. Whereas any company that has, people working there, when they open up a new job, inevitably people on that team already have a network of other people that they know in the industry that they like, that they can vouch for. And then those people that they know also have networks. And then they're posting the jobs in their LinkedIn profile. And the candidates coming in usually have some sort of personal connection to the company. And you're going to have to combat that, especially as a new person in the industry. So there's a couple tips and tricks that you can do. So the first is use a LinkedIn network. Sarah mentioned that that was important in her job search. It's a really great tool, especially for early on in your career. You can find people with the job title that you're applying to at a company. You can connect with them, ask them for a few minutes of their time to ask them more about the company and, say, I would love to know more about the company and the role. You can also, I like finding, like, usually it's a careers@company.com address that you can find on the company's career site. Usually organizations are really quick to respond to those type of messages. So sending a really personalized note to an organization, hi company, I am applying to or have applied to this position. I'm eager to speak with somebody at the company about the role. I'm curious to learn more about the culture. Something that intrigued me is X, Y, and Z from their website. And just find a way to get to a human. Attend meetups like this, other meetups. And what you're going to have to do is really network, especially again, for that first job. The first job into the career is the hardest job to get. So you're going to have to put a little extra work in and develop real human connection, because at the end of the day, people are hiring other people and it's a very, very noisy environment at the moment. So Sarah, anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think that's really spot on to where I was going to go with it too, is that human connection is so important, and LinkedIn can feel a little bit intimidating, but I think really putting yourself out there, finding the right people, kind of like another approach that I had along with giving my weekly kind of blog style updates on LinkedIn was anytime I had the opportunity to attend a panel like this, or I got to hear somebody speak, the moment the panel was over, I found them on LinkedIn, sent a request, messaged them to thank them for their time or a little note or whatever. And that really also kind of gave me almost a leg up. And when it came to job hunting, I already had this network of people that I had spoken to, from a human to a human. So I think human connection really truly is the way to go. Get comfortable sending LinkedIn messages. The worst that can happen is they say no, or they don't say anything at all, and you're not in any worse off spot than you were. So, because the best that can happen is you do make a connection, and that gives you an opportunity for a job. So definitely utilize Jessica's tips.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be daunting, I think, for some people to think about networking in that way, but it really does make a big difference. And I do think that we are in a time where we're increasingly overloaded by content and applications and bots and all sorts of things. And so it's almost become more important than it has ever been to make sure that you're cutting through all of that and you're getting into a space of dialogue. And most tech companies are still, especially for roles like the one Sarah has, are still doing it virtually. And so you're going to have to really use some of those online tools to find people and just put yourself out there. I promise you, people are nicer than you might think. And they're either too busy, to Sarah's point, they won't respond, or they will respond. And I think there's a lot of pay it forward type of attitude in the industry, or at least that's what we've seen. Yeah. And Philip, you can absolutely connect with us on LinkedIn. Sarah, I'm sure we can drop our LinkedIn profiles into the chat so people can connect. I'm going to do a quick time check. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we want to make sure we take on any other questions that you all have. We're glad to have you all here tuning in. The chat box has seemed to be the best place, most comfortable place for this group to ask questions. So feel free to continue to type in your questions. Or of course, you can raise your hands with the Zoom feature and ask questions that way. And while we are waiting for some questions, we'll drop in our LinkedIn profile links. Sarah did a really good job of keeping her LinkedIn really active and posting genuine like aha moments and genuine experiences on LinkedIn that helps people follow your journey and root for you, I think, in a digital capacity. So maybe you can share a little bit about why you did that and what your approach was into becoming active on LinkedIn during your job search.
Yeah, I think that really came from when I started at Momentum. Our very first week, we had our very first meeting with our career development point person at Momentum. And something that she said that she really spoke to the power of LinkedIn. And she had kind of stated that she had kind of put this challenge out before to have somebody from Momentum document their journey. And she had said that no one had taken her up on that challenge yet. So I was like, I'm going to do it. I will be the one. And so it really kind of started as a challenge, like request from her that I just put upon myself to challenge myself. I think especially too, because I was not comfortable with LinkedIn when I first started at Momentum. Again, like coming from retail, when you work in like, face-to-face, like in-person retail, there's not really a utilization of LinkedIn, and you don't see a ton of that in the retail world. And so I wanted to challenge myself to go ahead and get comfortable with LinkedIn before I even had to start my job search journey. So my journey at Momentum was about 4 months long. So I kind of knew, okay, I have 4 months before I really have to get serious with the job hunting. So let me kind of get familiar with LinkedIn. Let me use this as a way to get comfortable. And like I said, just kind of every week after a panel or hearing a guest speaker, I was using that as my opportunity to get comfortable messaging people, because it does feel uncomfortable to like, I'm going to send this total stranger a message and it feels weird. But like Jessica said, people are so much nicer than you think. So I was messaging anyone and everyone I could just to kind of force myself out of my comfort zone. We did a panel with Google and I still was like, they're Google, but I'm going to message them and I don't care. And so now I have multiple Google connections on my LinkedIn, which feels big. I'm not working at Google, but it's still great to know that I've messaged this person before, I've talked to them. It gives me some familiarity with them. And so I think that's huge, and just kind of like getting comfortable with the space and kind of doing those like practice things. And so, even feel free to send me a message after this and get comfortable with reaching out to people on LinkedIn. But that's kind of how it started and where the thought behind it came from.
That's awesome. It was such a good strategy. So we've got 2 more questions left with our time. So I'm going to prompt you with one of them, Sarah, and then I'm going to let you noodle on it for a minute so I can address the next one, because I think this one takes like a second to think about. So the question is, what do you believe the baseline knowledge is for somebody to be able to become a software engineer at a junior level? So I'm going to let you noodle on that. And I'm going to answer the second part of this question, which is a great question and very relevant, which is, how is the job market for junior developers at the moment? Really solid question, because as you all are probably seeing, if you're paying attention at all to the news and into business news, there have been kind of pretty constant layoffs announced in the tech industry this calendar year so far, really coming after the first quarter of the year. And what we have seen at Momentum is, well, first, let me set the context. The job market is always in flux. I have been doing this type of work for as far as coding boot camps and helping people find their start in the industry now for a decade. Prior to getting into the boot camp type of work, I was in talent acquisition for a software company. So I'm coming to you with about 13 years of experience watching the job market ebb and flow. And it's kind of like the tide at the beach. It always comes in and always goes out. And it's just pretty consistent that way. with that said, we often see these shifts happen where smaller companies, venture-backed firms, startups, early stage growth companies tend to kind of have a moment, and then larger companies kind of have a moment, and it kind of goes back and forth between the two. Last year, 2022, and also at the kind of the end of 2021, we were in a rare job market where both kind of the entire market was really hiring, was taking on a lot of new people. It was a fantastic time to get your foot in the door in the industry. The beginning of this year, things started balancing out, and they're a little bit more normal right now. And what you're seeing is larger companies, the kind that are getting publicly traded, that are in the news, those big logos that we all know, are in a period of laying off. Smaller companies, the kind of companies that you don't really hear about very often, that are venture backed, this growth stage, the startup stage, they are having a moment right now. They are hiring. So the momentum grads, the job seekers that we have right now that are getting offers, that are in interviews, they're interviewing with smaller stage companies, which is really exciting. We have seen some of our folks get laid off. The severance packages were really, really generous, and typically people are getting hired before their severance package is even over. So like their actual net salary outcome for the year is going to be pretty good. But it actually has been fewer and fewer people that we've had that have actually experienced a negative impact from a layoff movement. I will also say layoffs tend to be happening right now on more of the support function roles. So customer success, marketing, HR type of roles. We're not seeing a lot of it happen in the technical roles. And as far as what this means for junior developers, it is a slightly more competitive market than it has been over the past 2 years, but it's not really any different than what we saw in 2020 and then kind of the normal market that we saw 2019 and prior, which is your first job is going to be your hardest to get. There is a little bit of seasonality or cyclical nature to the job market. We tend to see either January when new fiscal years start, budgets open, we see a hiring uptick in Q1, we see a hiring uptick again towards the summer, and then we see like a last minute hiring sprint as you go into the right before the holidays towards the end of the year. And we are still kind of seeing that pattern play out. Again, we're seeing more opportunity at the smaller companies for junior devs. We sit in North Carolina, so for us, we're seeing a lot of what's happening on the East Coast. Everything from DC to Raleigh-Durham area to Atlanta is where a lot of our network is, and where we're seeing a lot of hiring happen. But I don't think it's a bad market for a junior developer to enter. There's always an opportunity for juniors to get into the door. I think you're going to have to put in a little bit more elbow grease, if you will, in the current market than you did like a year ago. But a year ago was so unusual. Just the amount of opportunity and capital that was in the space was not normal. That's an outlier year. 2020 was an outlier year too, but we all know why. So hopefully that gives you some context. And thank you for the question. And Sarah, I'll let you take on the first part of what the baseline knowledge is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I will say I don't think that there should be a baseline in the sense of, okay, I have to know this, this, and this before I can become a software developer. I don't think that's quite attainable. I think your best bet at giving yourself baseline knowledge is to focus on a current goal for yourself. And for me, with coming out of Momentum, my goal of a baseline was I'd like to be comfortable enough working with JavaScript. So that was my focus and my goal. So I would say if you can find a specific area or a specific language that you would like to learn or start with, that's usually going to be your best bet. And so, like I said, for me, that was JavaScript. And I couldn't give myself a baseline of, okay, well, I have to know this and then this and then this about JavaScript, or I have to know everything that there is. I just had to get myself comfortable enough to keep learning. So I think that's also, again, the key with where your baseline is kind of that being comfortable with learning, being comfortable with asking the right questions, because I've known people even at my company or other companies who've gotten hired knowing very, very little technical, terms or tools or anything like that, but we hired them because we could see that they have the appetite for learning and they had the hunger to kind of keep growing and striving. And I think the key to remember is that you can always learn the technical stuff. It's always going to come. So I think just presenting yourself as, I'm here to learn, I'm here to grow. I may not know everything yet, but that will come. So I really feel, I hope that that's not too vague or too little of an answer, but I really feel that that is the baseline, because again, you're just never gonna like show up and know everything. I know I talked about different tools like Power BI and SQL and DAX and Python and JavaScript. So don't take that as, well, I need to know all of these things, because I didn't know at least 3 of those things. When I started at Insight, I never heard of Power BI or DAX, and I did not know SQL. So I think just kind of giving yourself a goal of, I'd like to learn this thing and I'd like to get comfortable enough in it to work on my own and to give me that baseline understanding of how to keep growing in it. I think kind of that's the key. So I hope that helps.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's a great advice. I hope that was a helpful response to both of your questions. I see you typing. Good. Glad to hear it. Well, we have reached the end of today's session. I want if everybody could join me in the chat box and thanking Sara for being generous of her time over her lunch break today to share about her experience getting into the industry and being in her first few years of working in this space. We really appreciate that, Sara. Thank you for paying it forward to people that are working on getting into the industry. Again, we are Momentum. We are a vibrant community of people that are entering the tech industry. We help folks through a full-time software engineering immersive course. We are actively enrolling for our next course, which starts on July 10th. We encourage you to check out our website and learn more. For those of you that are in the industry already or are in other boot camps, we are glad you found us. We do the Day in a Life series, again, once or twice a month. So continue to follow us on Meetup for more tidbits of wisdom from our graduates that are out in the industry. We have dropped both Sara's LinkedIn profile and my LinkedIn profile links in the chat box. So be sure to grab those and connect with us on LinkedIn before we close out for today. Again, thank you so much, Sara, and we'll leave you all with this. Is there one piece of advice you wish you would have given your prior self the first day of work at Insight?
I think it would just, again, go back to the getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And just remember that you're new. So give yourself the grace for what you don't know. Understand that you don't have to show up with 100%, even if you're showing up with 5% knowledge, that's a step forward. So just kind of remember, give yourself the grace and the patience to learn. You're new, and that's very understandable. And don't lose that hunger to keep learning.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sara. Thank you, everybody, for the engagement today. That wraps up today's Day in the Life. Continue to follow us on Meetup for future events. Have a good afternoon, all. Thank you, Sara.
Everyone.
Bye.